tourism improvement grant guidelines, that we still have some discussion that we want to take up and look at that. So is that agreeable to you, Nathan, that we just discuss today and not take possible action, and maybe we need input from the city staff as to whether or not we wait next week? We've got some dates here when all three of us could be here.
That's agreeable to me. I'd rather not take action without a third of our membership here.
Right, okay. And we ask legal, and we don't have to even have a chair for this meeting, so we're just gonna, it's gonna be an informal discussion on the guidelines and the marketing grant guidelines. So, Bill, can you give us, an update of what you, and any correspondence that's been going back and forth about where we are with this, with the public?
Sure, I can kind of brief you on the two items before you. They go together, but let me try and bring you up to speed with where we are. The improvement grant guidelines, that's what we've been primarily talking about over the last several months. You actually have two sets of guidelines before you today and for this meeting. The committee made some decisions at the last meeting to on the improvement grant guidelines, and we've made those changes with regard to the match and the reimbursement, and we've highlighted those in yellow on the guidelines before you. There's a second set of guidelines for planning and marketing, and let me just kind of back up a little bit. In 2012, the Historic Preservation Fund was created, and it actually, and I wasn't involved, our staff wasn't involved, how it got to that point. So what our charge has been is to really take that, what was approved by council, and make it operational, implement it. So that's really our charge here. And with that in mind, the fund makes eligible three types of activities. The first one is what we've been dealing with, and I'll just call it the bricks and mortar. That's the physical improvements to a historic site. And then there's two others, and that is the marketing, and I'll just quote from the code. The second eligible item that could be used out of the fund is marketing the city's historical assets. And then the third one is providing financial commitments associated with securing grant funding from government or private sources. Matching funds is kind of what that is. So and the second and third one is, we haven't dealt with those guidelines of how to allocate funding for those purposes. And that's really what the second guidelines are for. When after the last meeting, when we started to develop that second set of guidelines for planning and marketing, we thought that it would be best, instead of combining it all into one application, is to have two sets of basically twin programs, if you will. They're coming from the same source of funds. They have the same objectives, just different eligible activities under those. One's bricks and mortar, one is planning and marketing. So we still went ahead and made them look exactly the same, more or less, except for the activities, and still make them competitive, so that the planning and marketing grants could be applied for and be competitively decided on. To give you one more little piece of background on those, the marketing of city's historical assets, that pretty much says what it says. But on the third one, where we talk about match grants, previously the city has applied for grant funding to do surveys, historical surveys, and nominations for districts through the state. And the state has an award each year, has a grant program each year, the HPF grant fund, that is due usually in the spring at some point, March. Okay. We need a match for those to continue doing that, which is one of the goals and priority actions of the historic preservation plan. So I think we've been on, so that was one of the ideas that went into that third line of why, because it would actually require the purpose of the fund to secure grants from government and other funding sources. So that's kind of where that came from. We need a 40% match when we apply to the state for surveys and nominations. We've also opened that up, though, to not just be for that. We could also open that up for truly marketing and planning for any sites, as well as design guidelines for historic districts as well, which is another expense to implement historic districts. But the foundation is surveys. So you got to survey first, then see if you have a district, and then implement that district through guidelines. In the meantime, there's not as much, obviously, the code does designate a portion of the fund that can go to those purposes. It says up to 15%. So it's not intended to be a large amount. We estimated it based on the latest from finance that amount for over the last, it's accumulated total up to about $40,000 could be spent that is in there right now. For the improvement grants, it's up to about $225,000. And that's a minimum. That is a minimum for the improvement grants. It's a cap on the planning and marketing, a minimum on the improvement grants. So we wanted to provide those side by side to you to look at, to discuss, see if you think that's a good way to go. And then we did, for both of them, like I said, we want to make these twin programs, so they're coming from the same source. So we made the background and the objectives the same. We took the language straight out of the code that says for all of these activities, any use of these funds from this approved fund has to be spent on projects that facilitate tourism resulting from the preservation and promotion of cities' historical assets. So we put that exact language in here. We did not change anything in terms of what has been approved by council. And then we went ahead and added, from a policy objectives standpoint, how does tourism and historic preservation, how is that promoted under our new preservation plan policies? So that ties that together. Thought it would be clear so that we just mirror the exact language that's been approved already by council for the fund and for policy. So that's kind of what's in front of you for discussion. And like I said, I think the only thing that I noticed as we were looking through here was we do think they should be run together. Whatever I think one needs to be decided on as a they need to be decided on as a package, because you can't really determine if you don't have competitive planning and marketing projects, then you could allocate more on the improvement side of things. So you kind of need to know both at the same time. So.
You want to go first? Okay. Thanks, Bill. I guess my question is, this is really for historical Renaissance surveys of neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
And the transient guest tax is to put heads on beds. I mean, that's how we get the money to get money into this fund. So I'm really trying to find in the application guidelines for the planning and marketing if that does relate to tourism. I know there's some cities that have tours of historical, like I've taken the one in Wichita of their, and the one in New Orleans with the Garden District and all that. So I guess that's my question as to what is, I mean, if this is for historical properties that property owners would have to do this survey or file for to that type of thing, I'm trying to figure out how that connects between heads on beds and tourism and that type of thing, so.
And that's why we added under the objectives, the wording from the preservation plan that was just adopted. Preservation it takes a broad-based approach. Promoting your historical assets relates to tourism, heritage tourism. The sites that you can't get to a historic site without first surveying, without first nominating, without creating a district, without telling that story. So that is when you asked about surveys, the reconnaissance surveys, that, for instance, downtown, we did a survey and also for Noto as well at the same time. That was related, and establishing a historic district or historic site through a survey. Actually, these surveys are mainly for districts. Within the district, you could elevate, if they don't do a district, you could elevate some sites to being listed by them individually. So in of itself, having promoting the city's historic assets relates to economic development through bringing people to the city to not just, you go to a convention, you go to a meet, that you came here as a tourist, but you go do other things. It's that sort of interrelatedness. And they want to come back. They see something that's authentic. They don't want to necessarily see what they've seen before. So the historic sites is very unique to our town, our city, and we do have a very unique story to tell. So that's how it's related, and that's why I think the language we wanted to put in there, under objectives, how it relates.
Do you know if we have any districts or any areas? I know, Westboro, we did the CID or whatever it was called. Do we have any that are interested in becoming historic neighborhoods that would be a tourism piece? I know in Wichita, when I went on that tour, we actually went into some houses, and I think the homeowners actually were part of the, they got some funds for people to come in and tour and that type of thing.
I mean, we do. I mean, there's a list in the plan of the neighborhoods we've surveyed and the ones we could potentially survey. I can just, for example, we've looked at College Hill. When College Hill came along, they only did College Avenue, but there is certainly interest to expand, or at least look at expanding that as a district. That was recently in a national publication. I think it was in This Old House publication, as a historic neighborhood that was promoted for the whole state of Kansas. So this is sort of how we get the name out there. It goes back to why you even do a district. A lot of times it's not. I don't, as a property owner, may not take advantage of the incentives, tax incentives. I may not be eligible for them, but at the very least, it is a recognition and a pride that goes beyond this, can go beyond the city, and will bring people back to the city. So that's how I think the survey was supposed to tie in to tourism, and bringing and those folks, and it was documented through our consultant that the folks that do that actually end up spending more money than the average tourist. Those that are interested in historical sites do spend more.
Well, and the ability to generate historic tourism, which would then result in heads on beds, hopefully, is part of the criteria to judging the award, correct? So if you came in with, it's not that we're going to give money to surveys. We're going to possibly give money to surveys that can demonstrate through the application process the ability to generate historic tourism.
Yeah, it's competitive. We still have to, I mean, in all likelihood, our department who would would help initiate those surveys with the neighborhoods or with an area would have to be on the same level and show how does this relate to tourism. Absolutely, you have to show that in your application.
And there's a 15% cap, which does not mean the 15% spend. I mean, it could very well be zero if none of those
That's right. If
applications are deemed to be more worthy than the other improvement grants.
Correct.
I have a few questions on the improvement grant application guidelines. One of the changes made to this was something that I introduced at the last meeting, the matching funds portion on the eligible properties. And I noticed how I had said that I wanted consideration to be given to applicants who can demonstrate a financial contribution to the project from sources other than us. This, as it was written, defined that as the greatest consideration, which, if you look one paragraph above, the greatest consideration, again, is defined as, which obviously there can't be two greatests, would be to the improvements that
Greater.
stabilize the building. So,
Probably should have said greater.
yeah.
Greatest.
Yeah, I think the yellow portion there, we need to change that to, however, consideration will be given, and just remove the greatest.
Significant or something that's not saying it is the greatest.
No,
I think consideration
I think
is
that should
Yeah.
have, meant to read greater, I didn't catch that. If you just want to delete that as all, that's fine. I think there was supposed to be some, by your direction, some emphasis, more emphasis on those than those that don't have it, so.
I would be fine
More
with
consideration, greater.
either way,
yeah,
greater,
okay,
more,
Okay,
just
all right.
not greatest.
Yeah, our oversight.
Good catch. You have any other changes to this one, the application for the improvement grant? It's really, I have looked at a lot of grant applications in my lifetime, and I think you've really got everything down here that we had talked about, and,
We're open on the timeline is certainly, we're open to discussion on that. I know on the state side, like we said, we have some state March deadlines that we want to hit, and people might want to know, but construction season certainly, we wanted to, now is kind of the
Good
time,
time to-
but we didn't know how much time to give folks to apply, so.
are you doing this on a calendar year, or what is the?
Yeah, so what this year represents is actually whatever we haven't, the money's been accumulating, and that's why it's a little bit, normally I think it's 115,000 estimated a year. So it's a
Right.
little higher and whatever hasn't been spent. And we can, and this is just meant for ballpark. There's money from last year that has not been spent, and money previous to that hasn't been spent. So 2014 represents probably 2 years, and then if we come back next year, 2015, that would represent a year, or we could wait. It does run out after 2015, so we have 2014 and 2015 to accumulate the fund. And so when you say calendar year, we can. There's not going to be too many more calendar years, but it would be the same timetable. if
Why
we
does
do
it run
give
out in
this.
2015?
I think that's just by
Ordinance?
code, yeah. Yeah.
So we just have to renew the
Right, so-
ordinance or not?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the Great Overland Station and the riverfront
Okay.
come off at the same time. if
Okay.
Is that correct?
That's right. It was an increase in the transient guest tax, 1%.
Oh, and that ends?
That ends
Okay,
the end of December 2015.
okay.
So there will
Okay, it's good to know. Okay, okay. I don't think I have any more questions on either one of the application guidelines for the marketing or the improvement grant. But I'm so very used to hearings where you have proponents and opponents, so, and if there's anybody here that wants to speak to it, I know, Chris, you're here, and we've had some corresponding emails. Is there anything that you want to present to the committee that may be things that we can consider or question and improve what we've got?
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate your discussion and Mr. Feiner's discussion. I too, as Mr. Feiner noted, and there are quite a few, I've had some time to carefully look at this, and there's some considerable ambiguities as well as conflicts. You brought up several, or at least one conflict, but there are quite a few ambiguities. I'm concerned that, as we've seen, it's very natural when the committee involved and the staff and various committees here find ambiguities, it really delays progress in process of award of the funds. So I have made several suggestions. I think this morning sent you copies. I could go through those. However, I'm wondering if I may ask your consultation about sitting down with the planning department, Mr. Feiner, perhaps with those people who were initially involved in the revisions to the 2012 ordinance, come to some agreement, because there are just so many things that are probably not worth taking public time and your time to discuss, but could very much help move this process forward. So I would very much appreciate if you consider recommending even that I, with the people remaining in the city who were involved in the negotiation to achieve the changes that were accepted at that time by the planning department, meet again, make the changes, come back to you, and let's move forward. And we really need to have the same, my biggest concern wasn't mentioned, is that we need to have the same dates, we need to have the same opportunities, all of us, to apply for matching funds as one grant to the other. And that's just not how it's going right now. So thank you very much for your...
Well, Chris, when you said that you want to get the people that were originally involved with, I would guess it's the ordinance that passed and then the planning or the committee that was established to put out the grant applications. Do you know how many people are still involved that we could be talking about?
Yes. 2 of the 3 of the 5, and I believe the city attorney might have been involved in some of those meetings, I don't recall, but 3 of the 5 people, one of whom was staff, are available.
Okay, so 2 staff from the city, and then how many were?
A staff from the city, and perhaps 2, I don't know if the legal was represented there, but a now retired member of the Landmarks Commission, and a member of the community that was, I believe, recommended by Mayor Wolgast, who was chairman of the committee at the time, was Grant Glenn. There are 2 other, the former chairman of the chairman at the time was involved. She's now moved out of state, and I believe a consultant was involved who's no longer in the practice. I'm fuzzy on that.
So you would recommend that the people from the city that were involved, and then those that were on the Landmarks Commission, and
Mr. Glenn, who was, I believe, requested and agreed by the mayor, who was chairman of the committee at the time.
right, okay. Have you talked to, I mean, do you know if that would happen, if we could get a meeting that these people would be interested in?
I truly believe that Mr. Finder and those people and myself, I would like to be involved, could do this. I don't see why we can't. I've had some very nice conversations, brief conversations with Mr. Finder in the last month, various times at the last meeting. I may be wrong. I don't think that there is any, can or would be any objection. I haven't talked with Mr. Allen in some time. I haven't heard any. I've made Mr. Glenn aware of my concerns. I haven't heard any dissonance from him, but I don't want to ask them. I'm not the committee. I'm not the planning department. but it's a suggestion, and I hope you'd consider it.
Okay. Well, if we could maybe do that before we meet again to pass both of the guidelines.
Well, I think that would be wonderful, but I'd like to hear from Bill if he's open to that, and if that's possible to get something like that done within the next week.
Yeah, it's just depending on schedules, we'll try and do that. We are open to that. That's, I would probably want to have, there really is, from a staff standpoint, nobody here in the city that worked on that. Am I correct? We were not involved. We were not at the table, so. And
That is, as far as, there's some truth to that. However, Mr. Paris was very directly involved with the chairman of the Landmarks Commission in organizing that group, so I refer to that aspect. I think it's very significant.
So I have Tim at the meeting.
Well, I would propose that I represent the planning department. We would have representation from city attorney's office for city staff. And yes, sure, we should meet.
Okay.
Sure.
I think that would be fine.
I
think
do
that
too.
would be great,
Yeah,
and then we can get this off the books
right.
next week.
And get it out there before spring when all the construction and everything needs to get going, so. Okay, is that then agreeable that, Chris, you'll meet, or Bill will plan a meeting and you'll get together and then we'll schedule a meeting. I know we had some dates here available from you for next week, but do we need to maybe have our transient guest tax meeting the following week and have you guys meet this next week? Yeah.
Anything that works for you,
Yeah.
Bill.
And I'd be happy to try and attend your meeting. I mean, just as to get a better perspective on all of the heritage tourism information. So, okay. Well, I'm not a real history buff, but I do like history, so, but yeah, okay.
Well, I think that's a way to proceed, that we'll maybe just refrain from scheduling our next transient guest tax meeting until
After they meet.
we know that meeting has occurred, and then we'll get together with everybody and schedule a meeting to take final action.
Sounds good. Okay. So with that, is there any other business we need to talk about?
I believe that was the entirety of business before the
Okay.
committee. Did you have anything else, Bill, besides these two? Okay.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, I have one final follow-up question. Has there been any input or question from the Lodging Association as to how the heritage and tourism is going, or the funds, 40,000 for one and 200 and some 25,000 for another, and basically that's where the money comes from, is lodging.
Mm-hmm.
So, has there been any input or discussion on how they feel about heritage tourism?
I have met, well, let's back up. There is a grant review committee that actually has representatives of the Visit Topeka and Tourism Alliance. So we had that meeting. I don't know if those representatives were there, but they've been in the loop, if you will,
Okay.
those representatives at least. I've had discussions with Visit Topeka as well, just to keep them in the loop as what's going on with the process, but, so,
Okay,
yeah.
great, thank you. Well, with that, we're adjourned.
Do we have to
Do we have to make a motion?
move to adjourn?
No, okay,
All right.
thanks.
Thank you.